The whole town called him crazy for taking that place, and now he understands why. A lonely old veteran spent everything he had to inherit a crumbling bunker on a frozen cliff in Michigan, thinking it was just a forgotten relic of war. But when his loyal German shepherd started growling at the giant stone fireplace, they found a hidden vault sealed for generations. What waited in the dark wasn't treasure, it was a legacy of danger. And now ruthless enemies are coming to claim it. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Winter in Marquette, Michigan pressed down like an ancient, merciless god, the sky a swirling wall of white and wind that erased sound and softened the world into cold silence. Inside the dim wood-paneled office of the law firm beneath a single flickering yellow lamp sat Henry Walker, a 73-year-old veteran whose body carried the map of a life spent in service. His shoulders were slightly stooped, not from defeat, but from years of bearing the weight of duty. His face was carved with deep lines, a sharp jaw covered by silvery stubble, and eyes icy blue, yet alive with stubborn fire, looked out from beneath heavy brows, as though forever analyzing a battlefield only he could still see. Across his frame he wore a thick red and black buffalo-plaid flannel jacket, its fabric faded at the cuffs from time and memory. Curled at his feet like a silent guardian lay Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd, with dense black and tan fur and powerful shoulders hinting at extensive K9 training. Ranger's ears remained alert, even when his head rested on the floor, and his dark amber eyes flicked between faces around the room, assessing intent, loyalty, threat, instincts honed beside Henry during long years when man and dog trusted each other more than the world. The room was filled with family blood, in name only, faces that had once smiled in holiday photos, now stretched tight with greed and condescension. Ella Walker, Henry's older sister, a woman in her late 70s with perfectly curled gray hair and a lifelong habit of pursing her lips as though judging the world's failings, clutched a silk handkerchief she didn't need. Her son Brian, a broad-faced man with soft hands and an expensive coat, lounged back with a smug ease. His cheeks flushed the color of entitlement. He whispered curt remarks to his wife, a thin woman with diamond earrings and absent eyes who clearly wished to be anywhere else. Opposite them, attorney Charles Whitmore, a thin man in his 60s with wire-framed glasses, thinning hair brushed across his scalp, and a face as carefully blank as a courtroom wall, shuffled papers with slow precision. His demeanor was that of someone who had long ago witnessed too many families reveal their true nature under the guise of mourning. Henry sat still, feeling Ranger's steady warmth against his boot, but his thoughts drifted. His late grandfather, Robert Walker, had been a stoic man with hands that smelled of wood and lake water. Henry remembered childhood fishing trips where Robert taught him how to cast a line, how to wait, how to see. But the old man never spoke of his own past, never mentioned his time in the war, except through the distant look in his eyes whenever thunder rolled like artillery across the sky. Henry had admired that silence, thinking it strength. Now he wondered if it had been a locked door. Attorney Whitmore finally cleared his throat, his voice a tired scrape of paper and years. We now proceed to the final asset to be distributed. To my client's grandson, Henry Walker, I leave the entirety of my property located at Falcon Point, including all land and structures thereupon, for his use as he sees fit. Silence, brief and suspended like fragile glass, then came the laughter. Brian slapped his knee dramatically. That rusty fallout bunker, congrats, Uncle Henry. Guess even the dead think you belong underground. His voice was too loud, too pleased with itself. Ella forced a sympathetic frown that didn't reach her eyes. It's sweet in its own way. A memento. To them, Henry was the unwanted branch of a family tree that had long since stopped bearing respect. He had served 2 tours, lost brothers in blood and war, come home to no parade, just an empty apartment, and a dog who understood him better than any person ever did. They hadn't visited him in years, but here they were, vultures waiting for their feast. Henry breathed slowly, resisting the instinct to clench his fists. He had faced men with IED triggers in their hands, insurgents screaming hatred into dust-filled streets. The mockery of kin was a weaker enemy, yet it still stung in a place buried deeper than shrapnel ever reached. Whitmore concluded the paperwork. Condolences were exchanged with the sincerity of a weather forecast. Chairs scraped, coats snapped shut, and then the room emptied, leaving Henry and Ranger standing alone by the door. Outside, the storm greeted them, not as a friend, but as a rival, testing resolve. Snow sliced sideways across the parking lot, the world blurred by a furious white churn. Ranger shook himself once, fur bristling against the cold, then pressed closer to Henry's leg shoulder, to knee, soldier to soldier. Falcon Point. Henry knew of it, everyone in Marquette did. A jagged stretch of land jutting into Lake Superior, topped with a lonely structure no one used anymore. People whispered that it was once a Cold War lookout, built to withstand storms and bombs alike. Teenagers dared each other to climb its fences in summer, but in winter even birds seemed to avoid it. A worthless inheritance, they all said, a cruel joke. But Henry remembered that last fishing trip with his grandfather, the day Robert placed a small, strange key into Henry's young palm. "You'll know when to use this," was all he'd said. The weight of the key felt heavier in memory now, like fate rediscovering its grip. Henry tightened his jacket. The red and black flannel cracked like old bark as he moved. He climbed into his weather-beaten Ford pickup, its heater nearly as stubborn as he was. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat with a soft grunt, paws perfectly planted, ready for orders. The engine coughed into life. Snow swirled in the headlights like ghosts rising from the lake. "Let them laugh," Henry murmured, voice low and sand rough. "We've survived worse, haven't we, boy?" Ranger turned and licked his hand once, as if to reply, "Always." As they pulled onto the road, the storm swallowed the truck whole. City lights vanished behind curtains of frost and distance. The highway stretched forward, a narrow ribbon, through a white void leading to a cliffside where secrets slept beneath stone and silence. Henry's heart beat a steady rhythm in his chest, a pulse of anticipation he hadn't felt since the day he hung up his uniform. Something inside him, something that had long lain dormant, shifted awake. This journey was not about inheritance. It was about unfinished business. He didn't know what waited beyond the storm, only that his grandfather had trusted him alone to find it. And trust was a battlefield command no Walker man had ever ignored. Ranger leaned forward, nose against the cold window breath fogging the glass. His ears twitched, as if he too sensed that something out there was watching, something waiting. And so the veteran and his loyal dog drove toward the edge of the world, toward a house clinging to a frozen cliff where the past would soon come knocking through the howling wind, where the truth would finally rise from the dark like a shadow reclaiming its name, where a man who thought his story was over would discover it had only just begun. The coast road to Falcon Point was little more than a frozen scar carved into the side of a cliff, where the breath of Lake Superior howled upward in icy waves that whipped snow into a blinding frenzy. The truck's tires skidded more than once, but Henry Walker kept a veteran's calm grip on the wheel, hands steady, jaw set, eyes narrow beneath his thick brows. Ranger, his German Shepherd partner, stood braced on the passenger seat, tail low, ears like antennas catching every shift of wind, as though danger itself rode upon it. Falcon Point emerged from the storm like a beast made of wood and concrete. Half an old cabin with cedar siding weathered to the color of ash, half a squat gray bunker with the personality of a clenched fist. Narrow windows, like gun slits, kept watch over the violent lake far below. Ice clung to the deck railings, as though trying to drag the structure into the depths. This wasn't a house meant for comfort. It was a fortress built against both enemy and nature, unyielding, unwelcoming, and yet stubbornly proud. Inside, the air was oddly clean, faintly scented with cedar and iron. Despite years of abandonment, there was no smell of decay. Two worn leather armchairs faced a monstrous stone fireplace made of river rocks so dark they seemed forged from volcanic glass. A heavy wooden table bore the scars of time knife grooves and burn marks like coded memories of survival. Dust glimmered in the cold light from the narrow windows, settling upon shelves lined with books about naval warfare, maritime navigation, and lighthouse architecture. Ranger moved first. He trotted with practiced vigilance, sniffing corners, eyes sharp. His body language changed in an instant, hackles rising a low growl, vibrating deep in his chest. He padded toward the hearth claws, scraping insistently at one specific stone set into the base. Henry knelt, joints stiff but movements precise. His calloused fingers traced the smooth, cold surface. No mortar. The seam was almost invisible. Above it on the mantel he spotted a small stone carved with a Celtic knot, faint but deliberate an anomaly in a room of brutal functionality. A trigger, he muttered. A long-faded instinct stirred awake the instinct that had kept him alive long after younger soldiers fell. He pressed the knot. A deep mechanical click rumbled within the wall, and the marked stone shifted forward by an inch. Henry pried it loose to find a steel plate with a tiny keyhole beneath. His heartbeat quickened. From his worn wallet he retrieved a flat, unassuming key, smooth edges brass dulled from decades of waiting. His grandfather had once pressed that key into his palm on his 18th birthday, saying only, "You'll know when." The key turned. Heavy internal locks groaned. And then the entire hearth swung inward, like the door of a vault, revealing a staircase vanishing into a darkness that felt chosen. Henry flicked on a flashlight and descended each step, ringing softly, metal against metal, into the cold belly of the house. Ranger followed silently behind, muscles taut and ready. The room below was impossible. A clandestine command center, a war within peace sealed beneath a lonely cabin. Concrete walls lined with polished steel gun racks held rifles and handguns that gleamed with meticulous care. Ammo crates stacked like bricks of a forgotten empire. A communications array, shortwave radios, field encryption devices, and a dusty satellite link coiled with dormant potential. A massive world map covered an entire wall marked with pins and red string charting lines that circled the globe. Not random. Tactical. Dangerous. Encased in glass artifacts. Weighted passport sets for a dozen identities, each stamped with the severe, weathered face of Robert Walker at different ages and disguises. A curved dagger with symbols etched into its jade handle reflected Henry's flashlight, like a serpent's glance. At the room's center stood a heavy steel desk. Upon it, a locked metal case and a leather-bound journal cracked with age. Henry opened the case first. Inside lay a single envelope, his name written in Robert's sharp, no-nonsense handwriting. He unfolded the letter slowly, Ranger sitting beside him, like a silent witness. The words were a blade. Henry, if you are reading this, then the quiet has ended. I was Sentinel, one of many who stood watch against the wolves who hunt from the shadows. Wolves like Marcus Cole. They believe the darkness belongs to them. My death will embolden them. They will come for what I've hidden. You can turn away. Seal this place. Live what remains of your life in peace. Or you can continue the fight. The world still needs sentinels. Robert Walker. Henry let the letter fall to the desk. A pulse of old purpose stirred in his chest, the same rising force he felt before every mission, the moment resolve defeated fear. He ran his hand over the leather journal, its lock broken, but its contents still refusing to speak, without the right mind to unravel them. He knew he'd need help. Someone who understood symbols and secrets the way a soldier understood bullets and bones. Above them, the storm battered the cabin walls, a growl of ice and wind that made the lights flicker. The lake roared like a beast beneath the cliff. The world outside was already reminding him that peace was never real, only a pause. Henry looked at Ranger. The dog gazed up at him with unwavering loyalty. Scars beneath his fur mapped a history only the two of them shared. Ambushes survived, brothers lost retreats that tasted like defeat. "Looks like the old man drafted us again," Henry whispered, placing a rough hand behind Ranger's ear. "I suppose we were never retired, only on standby." Ranger bumped his head gently against Henry's chest, a promise. Henry straightened, shoulders no longer slumped by age but squared by decision. He turned his eyes to the stairway above where the storm waited like a warning. He would not walk away. He could not when his grandfather's enemies were already moving. Without speaking further, he closed the steel vault door, engaging the lock. Metal clanked shut with the certainty of a vow. In that cold underground chamber beneath the roar of the winter storm, the last sentinel was reborn. Morning came late along the frozen coast, the sun too timid to pierce the gray shroud of winter skies. Inside Falcon Point, the air hung heavy with secrets. Henry Walker stood before the steel desk in the hidden vault, the leather journal resting beneath his fingertips, like a heartbeat waiting to be interpreted. His breath steamed faintly in the cold. Ranger paced once, then sat patiently, but his amber eyes revealed he sensed Henry's indecision. The old veteran knew a battlefield when he saw one, even if this war was made of symbols instead of bullets. He needed someone whose weapon was knowledge. The Great Lakes Maritime Museum in downtown Marquette was the kind of place where time softened its voice. It smelled of aged parchment, sea salt, trapped in artifacts, and dust that spoke of quiet obsessions. Henry entered in his familiar red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket, snow clinging to the fabric like cold confetti. Ranger trotted close beside him, drawing curious glances from visitors and staff alike. But it wasn't the dog that caused the receptionist to pause mid-sentence. It was Henry's posture. Not imposing, not angry, just firm, worn, and haunted like a lighthouse outlasting too many storms. She directed him to the archives where Dr. Emily Carter was working. Emily was in her early 30s, slender but strong, with long chestnut hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Strands escaped and curled around her high cheekbones, giving her an air of ceaseless motion even when she sat still. Her eyes, an arresting shade of green, held both warmth and fierce intelligence. She wore a thick gray sweater and dark jeans dusted with old paper flecks like she had spent her morning digging through forgotten centuries. When Henry introduced himself, Emily noticed the lines around his eyes first etched deeply by wind war and unspoken grief. His voice was rough but controlled, every sentence measured before released. She listened intently as he unfolded the photograph he had taken of a journal page, the symbols swirling across it like a nightmare disguised as geometry. Emily traced a fingertip lightly over the image, her brow furrowing. "This isn't just encryption," she murmured. "It's a fortress. Whoever designed this had a brilliant mind, and a trust issue the size of Superior." Henry didn't force persuasion. He simply nodded once, and something in that simple gesture, respectful, resolute, made Emily close her laptop and grab her coat. Curiosity pulled her harder than caution ever could. Back at Falcon Point, Ranger greeted her with a gentle sniff before resuming his silent patrol. Emily was stunned by the hidden room beneath the stone hearth, her pulse racing at the sight of Cold War radios, global maps strung with patterns of pursuit weapon racks that gleamed like sleeping serpents. "This," she whispered, turning slowly in awe, "is an intelligence archive, private, unauthorized, and very illegal." Henry made coffee as Emily spread pages of notes, constructing theories from cipher fragments. Hours passed, broken only by Ranger's occasional snort or the rumbling wind outside. The storm worsened, snow clinging to windows like frost-bitten fingers trying to claw their way inside. Dusk fell, a heavy blanket of darkness pressing against Falcon Point. That was when Ranger froze, head lifting slowly, ears angled sharply toward the north-facing window. The growl that slipped from his chest was low and primal, a sound that vibrated through Henry's bones. Henry moved fast to the narrow window. Through the dim light of a waxing moon, he scanned the tree line with field binoculars. At first, only white. Then a glint, small, precise. The wicked wink of a rifle scope or a surveillance lens. He spoke with calm that came only from years of combat. "Dr. Carter, down to the vault. Lock it behind you." Fear widened Emily's eyes, but she didn't argue. Her steps disappeared into the stair's metal spiral as Henry armed himself with the quiet efficiency of muscle memory. Ranger pressed against his leg, waiting for a signal. They slipped into the night like ghosts, Henry moving through snow with practiced stealth, Ranger a swift shadow ahead of him. In the shelter of pine trunks, Henry located their intruder, a lean man in matte black gear with a high-end observation setup, tripod, thermal scope, camera, encrypted radio. A professional. There was no warning. Henry tackled him from behind, a precise takedown executed in near silence. Ranger lunged, simultaneously pinning the stranger with jaws bared near his throat, not biting, just promising. Within seconds, the mercenary was zip-tied, gagged, and stripped of his gear. The storm howled congratulations. Inside again, Emily emerged from the vault, pale but steady. She looked at the bound intruder, then at Henry. Now she understood the scale of what she'd walked into. It wasn't just decoding history, it was stepping onto a live battlefield. They secured the man in a locked storage room. As Henry examined the confiscated comms equipment, the satellite phone on Robert's steel desk crackled with sudden life, an encrypted call forcing its way into their world. Henry answered. A man's voice, smooth, cultured, and predatory, filled the vault. His accent was vaguely European, the type belonging to those who travel so widely they lose any single homeland. "Mr. Walker," the voice purred, "we haven't been properly introduced. My name is Marcus Cole." Emily stiffened at the name from Robert's letter. Cole continued, a manufactured kindness coating every syllable. "Your grandfather and I built something extraordinary together until he became misguided. I would prefer to resolve this amicably. $5 million. Cash. For the house and all within. You can take your dog, enjoy your retirement. No bloodshed needed." Henry's reply was a single word dipped in iron no. Silence. Then a soft, disappointed sigh slithered through the line. "Sentiment is dangerous at your age, Henry. You could have spent your remaining years in peace. Every choice has consequences. The only question now is how much you will lose before you understand that you cannot protect what he left you." The line cut dead. Wind slammed against the shutters like a warning. Ranger stood protectively in front of Emily, muscles tense. Emily clutched her arms, her breath emerging shaky but controlled as she looked at Henry. "This is a war," she whispered. Henry met her gaze, his blue eyes no longer weighed down by age or regret, but sharpened by purpose. "It always was," he said quietly. "We just didn't know it until today." Ranger's tail swept once across the floor, ready. Emily's fingers curled into fists, determined. And Henry, reborn into duty he thought he'd buried, turned and faced the storm. The Sentinels would not go quietly. Dawn arrived as a pale smear behind a wall of clouds, offering no warmth and even less hope of clarity. At Falcon Point, the storm battered the windows relentlessly, insisting that winter was far from done with them. Henry Walker moved like a man who had lived too long on alert, checking locks, reinforcing shutters, and marking vantage points, while Ranger paced the perimeter with disciplined focus. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Carter remained hunched over Robert Walker's journal, her pen scratching across paper as she chased patterns hidden inside madness. Days passed in this tense rhythm war in preparation, discovery in silence, and the growing awareness that time was not a friend. Emily's posture stiffened over the pages, sleepless nights deepening the shadows beneath her eyes. She muttered to herself, variations of numbers and star names tumbling through her head until reality itself seemed encoded. But then, like lightning cracking open a dark sky, her chair scraped back, and she lifted her head. The exhaustion faded as excitement took over. "I found it," she said, breathless. "The master key." Henry leaned in, his blue eyes sharpening. Emily tapped her notes with a trembling finger. "It isn't just coordinates. It uses celestial alignments, publication dates of rare naval logs, and Polaris as an anchor point. The answer is a location, out there." She turned her laptop toward him. A blinking point in the vast blue of Lake Superior. Stannard Rock Lighthouse. A monolith on open water. No shore, no neighbors, no escape. Henry felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but recognition. Robert's words echoed from the journal. "The heart of our work rests where water and stone wage war forever." They would need a boat. The docks at Marquette smelled of diesel and fish guts, wind knifing across the wharf. Henry approached a lone figure, coiling a rope. A tall, barrel-chested man, with a beard white as foam, and hands permanently scarred from nets and hooks. Sam Johnson, a fisherman in his late 60s, wore a stained canvas jacket and an expression that suggested life had taught him patience the hard way. He squinted at Henry before a flicker of recognition warmed his weather-beaten face. "You're Robert Walker's grandson," he said, voice gravel rough. "That man once pulled me out of a wave bigger than God. You need help, that's my debt calling. No speeches, just loyalty paid forward. Sam's boat." The granite lurched violently as they pushed into open lake, the water black and raging. Emily clutched the rail with white knuckles. Ranger curled beside Henry, fur bristling with unease. Henry remained upright, legs wide, the ship's fury a familiar adversary. Hours later, a dark shape rose from the storm-churned waves, Stannard Rock Lighthouse. A lonely cylinder of stone and rust, its top crowned by a shattered lantern room, where glass cracked like a spiderweb. Waves lashed the tower, trying relentlessly to drag it under. No dock, no ladder. Only freezing stone polished slick by decades of assault. They anchored as close as safety allowed. Henry went first, driving a climbing spike into a crevice, then securing ropes for Emily and Sam. Ranger, harnessed and steady, was hoisted up last landing with an eager shake and a low warning growl. He never liked places where the world ended on all sides. Inside the lighthouse, the air was stagnant and cold. The spiral staircase groaned with each careful step upward, rust flaking away like old secrets. At the top, the wind screamed through cracked panes, but there in the center of the room stood an old iron chest fitted with a small, decorative compass rose. Emily read the faded inscription scratched beneath it. "A homeward bearing unlocks the compass of truth." Henry inhaled slow and steady and rotated the compass to point toward Falcon Point. The tumblers inside clicked, then released. Inside lay a life distilled, a black ledger with pages thick as judgment, photographs of his grandmother in a summer he could barely remember, a pair of World War I dog tags dulled by sweat and sacrifice, and one more letter sealed but waiting. Henry opened it with reverence. "If you walk this far, you carry the heart of the Sentinel inside you. Use this ledger to tear down the empire built on the bones of the innocent." Strength is not muscle or youth, it is the refusal to surrender what is worth defending. I am proud of you, Henry. He didn't realize his hand was shaking until Emily touched his elbow gently. Before relief could settle, Ranger snapped to attention, ears forward, teeth bared, a deep, furious growl rolling from his chest. Then came the slam of boots on metal stairs, too heavy to be the wind. Henry and Emily barely had time to exchange a look before armed men surged up the staircase like shadows with knives. The confined space turned combat into brutality and instinct. Henry fought with the economy of a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of staying alive, elbow strikes, throat jabs, a knee to the solar plexus. Every movement counted, every breath mattered. Ranger became living thunder, launching his body with lethal precision jaws, locking onto enemy limbs, dragging them down like prey. Emily, adrenaline turning fear to fire, grabbed a rusted fire extinguisher, and eyes burning with determination, swung it into a mercenary's leg, sending him tumbling down the coil of steps into his comrades. But then all stillness. A figure stepped into view. Marcus Cole. Silver hair, slicked back, tailored coat, pressed and perfect, and a face carved from cold ambition. His eyes were sharp and mocking the eyes of a predator in fine leather gloves. He carried a pistol until he dropped it with theatrical disdain, letting it clatter to the floor. "Steel or steel, Henry," he said smoothly. "Like our generation always settled things." Two knives flashed Marcus, wielding his with the posture of a trained operative. Henry clutching his like an extension of will. The storm outside crashed against glass. The storm inside tore at skin and bone. Marcus moved with practiced grace, swift and efficient, but he underestimated the weight behind Henry's strikes. This fight wasn't for ego. It was for Emily, for Ranger, for Robert, for justice buried under years of silence. Blade met blade sparking. Fists met ribs thudding. Blood warmed frozen air dripping. Marcus lunged arrogant in certainty. Henry sidestepped, redirected, and caught his wrist, disarming him with a twist that made tendons scream. He slammed Marcus against the frozen stone wall, knife pressing beneath his jaw. History's wolf subdued by the defender he never saw coming. The barrel of rage and revenge collapsed into silence. The lake roared below as if demanding the surrender of everything fragile above it. But Henry Walker did not break. He did not run. He did not surrender. The Sentinels' legacy would not die here, not while he still breathed. Morning arrived shyly, its pale light glimmering across the battered skin of Lake Superior, as though uncertain whether peace truly returned. The storm had left behind silence, thick, uneasy silence. The granite emerged from the fog like a mythic beast, its hull scarred, but victorious. Sam Johnson stood at the helm, jaw set, and eyes narrowed against the freezing spray. It was he who ferried Marcus Cole and his mercenaries trussed and beaten into custody, where Coast Guard officers asked no questions and made no assumptions. They received GPS coordinates and a sealed folder. Henry handed them both, of which made the men pale and straighten their spines. Henry did not accompany the prisoners to the local station. Marcus Cole was no common criminal to be tossed into a small-town jail where his influence could dissolve bars like sugar in warm water. There were instructions inside the black ledger, names, codes, hidden contact channels, and Henry followed them. The trail led him to a government compound in a quiet district of Washington, D.C., its concrete facade pretending to be dull and bureaucratic. Inside, General James Porter waited. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 70s, but his posture remained ramrod straight, as if age feared to weigh upon him. His silver hair was cropped close, military neat. His face was carved in stern lines, the kind that seemed incapable of a smile, yet his eyes betrayed a deep well of memories, both honorable and haunting. He extended a large, rough hand, one that had once pulled triggers and signed orders with equal resolve. Henry placed the ledger before him. Porter opened it, and page by page, Henry watched his expression fracture. First skepticism, then realization, then the solemn heaviness of a truth too large to deny. Robert Walker, he murmured voice hoarse, was always the best of us. He shut the book with a decisive slap. This contains enough evidence to dismantle Cole's entire network silently, completely, and without endangering the innocents he manipulated. Then Porter looked up, studying Henry, as though seeing not a retired veteran, but a man stepping back into a role he once promised to leave behind. Robert told me you were to choose. Not be forced, not be ordered. Choose. So I ask you, Henry Walker, what do you want to do now? Henry breathed in slowly. His back ached, his scars thrummed beneath his clothes, and his bones complained every time his heart dared feel brave. But bravery wasn't the domain of the young, it simply required purpose. He ran his fingers along the worn fabric of his red and black buffalo plaid flannel, feeling every rough thread like a memory stitched into his skin. I've spent years running from myself, from the past. But right now, he said, voice steady, I have a home worth protecting, people worth protecting. I can't just watch the world rot from a porch chair. General Porter's lips twitched upward, just barely a victory smile from a soldier who knew exactly what it meant to stand up again when life begged you to sit down. Then it's time the Sentinels rose again, he whispered. By the time Henry returned to Falcon Point, the storm had surrendered to a breathtaking sunset. The sky was painted in gold and burning amber, striking fire over the ice-draped cliffs. Smoke curled peacefully from the chimney, and the wooden porch glowed. Emily stood outside, wrapped in a thick parka, wind teasing her chestnut hair free from its tie. She looked at Henry with relief and a new kind of admiration, no longer for the secrets he carried, but for the courage he chose to own. Ranger lay beside her, stretched out proudly, like the guardian of a castle, one ear flicking, as Henry stepped onto the porch. Inside the bunker remained a fortress of hidden weapons and encrypted systems, but above it, the cabin had become something entirely different. Not a hideout, not a relic, a home. Henry eased down into his chair, warmth soaking into his aching muscles. Ranger pressed his head against Henry's knee, and Emily carried in 3 mismatched mugs of coffee, steam swirling like hope rediscovered. Henry exhaled, the words coming out half thought, half prayer. It's over. Emily shook her head gently, her green eyes reflecting the last shimmer of day. No, Henry. This chapter is over. There are more coming. Your grandfather didn't leave us just a ledger. He left us a war and a choice about how to fight it. Henry looked at her, so young, so determined, so full of a fire. He thought the modern world had extinguished. Ranger nudged his hand with insistent affection, his loyalty a vow that needed no words. 3 silhouettes, each shaped by loss and resilience, stood together facing the endless horizon. The lake roared again, but now it sounded like applause rather than warning. There were still wolves in the world, greedy, ruthless, well hidden behind polished smiles. But here on this frozen cliff, the new Sentinels stood ready. Henry tightened his coat around his shoulders, the weight of the flannel grounding him in every choice he had ever made, and every choice still ahead. Emily leaned against the railing, her breath visible clouds of determination. Ranger settled into a vigilant loaf at their feet, soldier guardian friend. And in the glow of dusk, Henry Walker, once broken, once lost, felt something spark alive in the cracks of his weary heart, purpose reborn. Robert Walker's true legacy was not the guns, not the codes, not even the ledger that could topple empires. It was this: to keep watch, to protect, to love the world enough to keep fighting for it. The storm would come again, but now they would not face it alone. Sometimes God places us in storms not to break us, but to reveal what still needs protecting inside our hearts. Henry's journey reminds us that miracles don't always arrive wrapped in light. Sometimes they come quietly through the people who stand beside us, through the courage we thought we had lost, or through the strength God planted in us long before we knew we would need it. And just like Henry, each of us is carrying something worth defending: our family, our faith, our kindness, our hope. In the battles of everyday life, from the small frustrations to the heavy burdens, may you remember that God never leaves His watchers alone. He walks with you. He shields you. He whispers direction when the path feels dark. If this story touched your heart, share it so it can bless someone else today. Comment below where you're watching from: your city, your state, or your country. And if you want more stories of resilience, faith, and unexpected miracles, make sure to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps today, tomorrow, and always. Amen.